baby food, and a butterfly came out.
The maybe the Mudslinger. No, probably the Magician, I'd say.
Okay.
Because I can't imagine.
Welcome to the Comedians in Elevators podcast. I've got my guest, George Bello. George, say hi, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is George. I am a director, actor, writer, YouTuber, social media, sound mixer. I try to do everything.
So, what have you not done then?
What haven't I done? I stay out of lighting. I'm
Okay.
not really the gaffer type.
Okay. All right. Some of the physical stuff, but aside from that, you're the jack of all trades, right? Or the George of all trades.
Yes, there we go. The Georgia
Exactly.
Electrics.
All right. Very cool. You ready to get started?
Absolutely.
Listen, to my regular listeners, I know you don't like when at the beginning of these conversations I ask you to subscribe. None of us like it. I don't like saying it. I don't like it being in here. But it's frustrating. You know what else is frustrating? It's also frustrating when I look in the back end of the YouTube channel and I see that 56% of you that watch frequently haven't yet subscribed. And I know this because I see it in the comments section. You say things like, I didn't know I didn't subscribe. And that's actually what fuels the show. Basically, it's like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask all the time, because it enables us to build and build and build. And we're going for the long term here. Hit the subscribe button and we'll continue to build this show for you. That's my promise. Thank you to all you guys that do subscribe. It means the world to me. All right. So the whole point of the podcast is to compare and contrast the comic versus the comedian. So I define the comic as any person telling funny jokes versus the comedian who's a funny person telling any jokes. So,
Mm.
George, would you agree that you start as a comic and evolve into a comedian?
I would agree with that because to get to the, as you described, the comedian side, it takes a skill. It takes to kind of learn the art of comedy versus a
Mhm.
comic. You just like, oh, I just thought of a funny joke yesterday. Here it is.
Right, absolutely. And I'd argue the comic has to collect a lot of those funny jokes just to be relevant, right? So it's not
Yeah.
just a random one, you're working on it. So I'm not saying that the comic doesn't know anything, right? But you
Hmm.
definitely a place to start
For
to
sure.
start basically. All right, first question. It's about the role of persona in comedy. So how much of the comedian's voice is a character versus their real self?
I think for comedians, they have to put a lot of themselves in their art, because it usually helps make them more relatable to whoever's listening to them. So I feel like if we go percentage wise, I'd say like maybe like 70-30, 70%
Okay.
being like how much of themselves they put into it, and then 30% of just kind of like just way more of performance side of things.
Okay, okay. So does authenticity matter or is illusion part of the magic?
I think it does for most people because or else like how am I supposed to relate to this person if I can't really see them on that human level, get that human connection from them?
Right. Okay, I agree with that. All right, so punching up versus punching down. Where do
Mm.
comics versus comedians stand on this? So let me put it in some historical context. Did a jealous medieval prince become the first comedian by killing the court jester?
Oh, interesting. Um, I no. I would say not. Um,
I know it's a hard one to put into context. So would you say that the audience agreement with the comedian is a form of permission or alignment?
um, I mean, yeah, it would have to be sort of like a permission thing so that the comedian can really feel they can go like all out with this audience and like give almost 100% of them in their performance.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So that's good. So let's go with the next one. So cultural translation of comedy. So how do jokes that work in one country bomb in another?
Ooh, I mean, that's the thing about culture. Like every culture can be very different from one another. So something that may work in, let's say South America may pretty well bomb in, in an Asian country just because like, we for the most part, grow up differently, different food, different kind of people, different, I mean, different, absolutely different languages, but also just like different perspectives that we all have from each other.
Can you imagine what one of those perspectives could be that would possibly cause this bombing situation?
Um, like let's say some cultures are like more religious than others. So maybe if you're Christian, for example, then you're more
Mhm.
likely just to live your life in the way that God would want you to, versus maybe a different culture who maybe doesn't even necessarily like oh, raise my hand. Doesn't necessarily raise their kids religiously. And so those kids are like typically more atheists and like don't really care about some higher being judging them or anything like that.
Okay, that's a good one. There's other ways to look at it, but, between different versions of shame, for example,
Hmm.
right? So are comics universal, or are comedians more culturally specific?
Ooh. I'd say comics are more universal just because I don't expect, as we kind of discussed, I don't expect more people to study the art of comedy versus just like coming up with jokes and kind of being like the clown of the friend group and stuff like that. So
Sure.
yeah, I definitely say more comics because it's like, I mean, not to discredit comics, but it's like less effort than like a comedian if we're comparing the two.
Ah, interesting. So you're saying volume of effort or quality of effort?
Quality, quality. Because a
Okay.
comic, if we're still using the example of just someone in a friend group making the others laugh, then at a certain point, you know what makes your friends laugh. So you can just kind of like keep hitting that note of comedy versus a comedian kind of like they typically try to keep elevating their stuff and like making like bringing more people into like their audience to so they try to capture a wider net of
So
people.
I've personally seen that go for both, where comics
Mhm.
are actually constantly coming up with new materials, and comedians that don't change their material at all,
Mm.
right? So really, they're all four of these paradigms do exist.
Yeah.
But I could see what you're saying, that you would basically say, hey, if they're not coming up with new stuff and it's just a group of friends, they're being a comic. They're not really being a comedian. But
Yeah, for sure.
you never know, if it's really based on their personality, that would be the comedian, right?
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, it depends on like the level of success a comedian gets because
Well,
once I
even in a
what
small, like a friends group, he could still be a comedian. Would you agree?
yeah, for sure.
Okay. Go ahead. I was interrupting.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say I do agree with the fact that like once a comedian hits a certain once they plateau at a certain level of success, they don't have to keep elevating. They can kind of stick with what works for them.
Is it gonna, but we're going to get diminishing returns though, all right? It's going to obviously start going down
Yeah, over time, yeah. It just
quality. All
depends
right.
on where they're happy with their level of success. Because if they're not happy and they want to keep going up, then they're going to put more effort into it. But if they're fine with where they are now, then it's just like, yeah, we'll just keep beating this drum.
What about starting over, right? If I'm arguing that you start as a comic and evolve into comedian, and then we get to that plateau, instead of slowly declining, why not just start from the beginning and become a comic again?
Yeah, I think in that instance, I feel like if you're starting from ground zero, that typically means like I feel like that you lost everything that you had gained from that initial success. So
But you
then it kind
didn't.
of, well, I mean more like success wise, like sort of
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
like maybe financial or whatever you
Sure.
got going on, and
Yeah.
then you're kind of forced to start over and kind of like regain people's hearts and their laughter.
That's pretty much where I'm getting at with the regaining of your fans and audience. But I'm,
Mhm.
I'm also going to argue that the comic has a quality that is all its own, right? Is there this part where you are really, really telling just jokes that anybody can tell, but you're coming up with new material. It's not old stuff you're recycling, right? So there's still a lot of work to be done there. A
Yeah,
new base can be formed. That's at least my argument.
yeah.
Not to mention the physical part, like comic books, there is an allure to that as well. All right.
Mhm.
Crowd work versus crafted work. So if comics riff like influencers in the comments section, for example, and comedians perform like in reaction videos, where is the sweet spot?
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. Um, I guess the sweet side would kind of be like a little bit of both in there. I
Hmm.
think you would have to come in with the craft work so that you already know, mostly what you're talking about, and then kind of at certain points gauge with the audience, see how they're doing, kind of check in a little bit. I think, and I like the comparison you have with the comments versus like reaction videos, because I
Hmm.
feel like the sweet spot for both of those is like live streaming because ergo you're coming in with your own material and then you're watching the chat and then reacting off of what they're saying. So you're kind of getting a little bit of both there with that.
That's a tough one. So, just logistically, perhaps if there's a second person maybe reading the questions or one of those things in the chat because it can move at a speed that's just incomprehensible to a lot, right?
Hmm.
I'm just saying, like technically, have you done this? Is this something you've personally experienced? This kind of the live chat comment section streaming at one
Yeah,
time?
I do stream. I do stream a little bit, so I do
Okay.
have a little bit of that experience. So I try to engage
Now,
as much as possible.
you're engaging, but how much really in a comedic way can you do it at that speed?
It depends on what I'm doing on stream because I think if I'm like playing a game and I'm
Yeah,
like trying to engage to chat and thus making me lose at the game, then I could be like it could be like a big funny moment. It's like, you guys, stop distracting me, right? I'm trying to focus
that's
here.
true. That's true. But that's a third thing. So perhaps is there a video game that has to do with magic where you have to conjure in a way, like there's a certain time frame perhaps? Because I'm going to link this always to the magician. So I'll think about a game. If there's not one, we might have to come up with that.
Okay.
But so what happens when a comic leans too much into crowd work or a comedian gets heckled?
Yeah, I if that happens, then you're kind of like depending too much on the audience to do most of the legwork, and it could come off as like you don't have much. I guess it really depends on the comic themselves because I feel like for some comics they're very sociable, right? They're very
Hmm.
confident. They can do very well in conversations with strangers and yeah, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like that would be playing into their strengths if they do a lot of crowd work. So it really just depends on what the comic is bringing to the table.
Right. Okay. All right. So, advertising and self promotion. Who advertises themselves more? The comic, the comedian, or the magician?
Oh, okay.
You know that place where you're not conscious and you're not sleeping either? That's your power bill to the electric company. Right here. I want us to be here with free energy, where the Wardenclyffe Tower meets the Eiffel Tower. But that's not where we are. We are here, where you've got the utility and you've got residential solar. Between these two, we know which one saves you money. This is where we can go in the meantime. But this is where I want us to be now, and this can be done now. So let me deputize you to represent DOSE, Department of Solar Efficiency, and let's get on the podcast and get the message out today. See you soon.
I'd probably say the comedian solely
Okay.
because if we're talking purely in an advertiser's perspective,
Yeah.
I see more stand-up comedy clips on social media, thus motivating me to see if I'll follow that comedian or not and like, get into their stuff. Versus like I don't really see much magician things out there. And plus comic they could still like post like, clips on social media and whatnot, but I feel like
Mhm.
I tend to see more of comedians.
Okay. So is self promotion seen as selling out or is it necessary for survival?
No, I definitely don't think it's sellout. It's definitely on survival because I mean we see clips of podcasts, clips of live streamers on social media, and those all help help them gain a following. So I'd say this it's the same for stand-ups as well. It's like you want to put the funniest moments from your set online so that people be like, oh, actually this guy's pretty funny. I should follow slash go see a live show of his.
All right. All right. So censorship and offense. Does a comic avoid offense while a comedian courts it to prove a point, like a magician? Beady, 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 beady.
Give that to me again.
So so it's about censorship and offense. So
Mhm.
does a
Yeah.
comic avoid offense while a comedian courts it to prove a point, like a magician?
No, I don't think a comic would avoid offense for something like that. That's an interesting one. I feel like the comedian is more likely. Maybe it depends. I feel like a lot of comedians don't really care and will say whatever,
Mhm.
because maybe they feel like they've earned the right due to their status to kind of like not have to censor themselves. Um,
Isn't that the
yeah,
job of the comedian, though? Irrelevant of status?
yeah. Maybe status doesn't really play that much into it. I'm just trying to think of
No, I see what your point. You're saying that you have to earn an audience, basically, right? Because if you're commenting on society, people don't want to hear it because you should just do your job, which is as an actor. But a comedian, that is their job. Would you agree?
yeah.
Okay. So who survives better in a cancel culture environment?
Hmm.
The comic, the comedian, or the magician? Or the mudslinger?
The maybe the Mudslinger. No, probably the Magician, I'd say.
Okay.
Because I can't imagine. Because I don't know what the Magician would even do to like deserve such a canceling. Like the comic comedian can accidentally say something that they shouldn't have on stage, but I feel like the Magician, there's l fewer things for them to get in trouble for.
I mean, accidental death, like that could cancel
That's
you.
true. No, that's true.
Some dememberment. Okay. So, timing and delivery, is it a science or an art? So, do comics rely more on structure and comedians more on rhythm and emotion?
Ooh, hmm. I think it really depends on the person's perspective. Because
Mm,
I feel like some people timing and delivery is like a science. Like they can break it down kind of like analytically in their brains.
mhm.
But I feel like others who interpret it as art kind of study it, kind of practice, rehearse. I personally think that it's more of an art to get it down, the timing and delivery, but I think it really just depends on how the person's outlook on life.
Okay. Okay. I'll go with that one. So, laughter versus applause. Are comics chasing laughs and comedians chasing applause breaks that validate the message?
Well, I definitely think, uh, yeah, I'd say so. I feel like comics definitely chase those laughs, and comedians do sort of try to hit that button at the end of one of their bits to make sure that it gets the big applause it quote unquote deserves
Mm,
in order to transition into like whatever the next story slash joke is. And if they don't like really hit that button successfully, they look for other ways to get there next
okay.
time.
So, comedy is commentary. When does a comedian cross into being a philosopher or a preacher?
I do love this question. I do love this question because I have had that. I'm pretty sure I've had that thought of like going to a stand-up comedy club is kind of like a church almost because like
Yeah.
an individual gets on stage and starts going talking to the audience and kind of like making them try to see life their way and this sort of thing.
Hmm.
So the way I see it is that stand-up comedy has the spectacle of a preacher. And then typically with a lot of what they're saying on stage does come down to what philosophy they try to go through in their life. So
Hmm.
I don't know if it's a cop-out answer to say a hybrid of both, but if I had to pick one, then probably more like the philosopher route.
Okay, you don't have to pick, but I could see possibly if you to make a differentiation, at least the way you've described it, would you say that the preacher is more external and the philosopher is more internal
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
in the same person, wrapped up in the same person,
Yeah,
right? So they may
yeah, yeah,
be
yeah.
externally proselytizing, but internally, really, they're having this. this dialogue with their own ideas.
Hmm.
So is that good or does it dilute the humor?
Uh, no, I don't think that dilutes the humor at all. I think that's a really good, I think it's a good place to start to establish eternally kind of what you're doing. Because I think a lot of people just like say at face value what they're doing, which is just like, telling jokes, making people laugh, making money, yada yada. But
Hmm.
if we truly try to break it down to its foundation, that's what's happening here.
Okay. All right. So comedy and vulnerability. I would argue that comics hide behind their jokes and comedians expose themselves. If you agree, which one is braver?
I'd say probably the comic. I do kind of agree with you that like comedians do like hide themselves more.
Okay.
Um,
Comedians or comics?
sorry, what did I
Well, you
say?
tell me. So I know these are a little bit of trick questions, but I'm saying that comics hide behind their jokes, right? That's why they're
Oh
just
yeah,
telling jokes that anyone can tell.
yes.
Now, sometimes they do it; it's only they can tell it because they're pretty good at their delivery. But I would definitely argue that comedians expose themselves because it's all about them. Now, do you agree with that?
No, I actually do. I actually do because I feel like comedians do, depending on where they are in their career, really wear their heart on their sleeve,
Hmm.
and typically do end up telling these vulnerable stories, but for the sake of comedy versus comics, kind of like what you were saying. It's just like they can just tell a joke that they just like thought of, or like, that anyone can really tell.
Well, usually they repeat the same jokes if they're good, right? So there is
Yeah,
a kind of
yeah,
a
yeah.
efficiency. So would you say that one is braver than the other?
Yeah, comedians,
Okay,
because
all right,
like it's not easy being
sure.
vulnerable, especially in a room of strangers.
Exactly, exactly. Okay. So on the Comedians and Elevators podcast, um we've got a tradition here
Okay.
where the previous guest asks a question for the next guest. And so the previous guest was Matt Novak, and his question to you, George, but he didn't know that you were going to be on the show, is what is your stance on political humor?
Ooh, okay. I think my stance on political humor is that, you know, oh, at this point in our society, politics have gotten very cutthroat. I remember
Mhm.
as a kid, it wasn't that crazy, but like now in my adult years, I'm seeing people are more at each other's throats, and things get really dark, things get very serious because people's lives drastically change due to the outcome of whoever's the big boss on top. So I do think political humor is necessary so that we can, at the very least, like it doesn't fix everything, obviously, when it comes to political issues we're having in the country, but it does give us a moment to kind of take a step back and kind of laugh.
It's a good attempt. Okay, I'll go with that one. So, legacy. Who gets remembered? This is the last question. So, will the comics Type 5 survive time, or will the comedian's cultural point of view be more timeless?
I definitely think it's the comedians, a culture in their stamp on it, because kind of how we were having this whole conversation, comics think of like probably their best jokes, and like maybe over time someone in their audience they could be like, oh yeah, I think this comic told this really good joke like 10 years ago, I'm trying to remember. But a comedian can really connect with people because of how vulnerable they're able to be, and then I think that resonates way more and sticks way more in people's hearts than just like a good joke.
There are some good jokes like the spelling of the different states. There's a comic who has a really good bit. I don't remember all the details, but it is an example. So, George,
Yeah.
where can everybody find you online?
Yeah, all my social medias are at Pinkmas. That's spelled pink a mouse, but without it the. There's no e.
Okay.
Um, and I'm on every social platform with that: Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, and yeah.
Very cool. Well, George, thank you so much for being my guest. And for everybody else, please like and subscribe. And we will see you in the next one.
Bye, everybody.